Wyoming Territory, late autumn of 1873. The wind came down hard off the Bighorn Mountains, and Franklin Ames was chopping wood behind his cabin when he heard the sharp crack of a branch underfoot. He turned fast, hands still on the axe handle. At the edge of the clearing, where the pines opened just wide enough to show the worn trail, a woman staggered forward. Her dress was torn, dusty from the road, and her face, what little he could see beneath the dirt and fading bruises, was pale with exhaustion. She took 2 more steps and collapsed, crumpling into the brittle grass. "Ma'am?" Franklin dropped the axe and ran to her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She did not answer. Her skin was cold, her breathing shallow, but steady enough. He lifted her carefully, arms strong from years of chopping timber and hauling stone, and carried her inside. The fire was already lit, the stew on the stove just starting to bubble. She was thin, lighter than she should have been. Her boots were near falling apart, and her hands were scraped and raw. He laid her on his cot, covered her with his own quilt, and sat beside her, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. It was nearly midnight when she stirred. Her eyes blinked open hazel, sharp even through the haze of pain, and met his. "You are safe," he said gently. "You made it to my place. I am Franklin Ames." She tried to sit up but faltered. He steadied her with one hand. "Do not try to move too fast," he added. She swallowed hard and looked around the small room. "Where am I?" "My cabin. About 20 miles west of Buffalo. You collapsed at my doorstep." She closed her eyes for a second, as if weighing whether to trust him. Then she nodded once. "Thank you. What is your name?" She opened her mouth, hesitated, then said, "Bethany Lowell." "Bethany," he repeated. "Are you hurt anywhere I should look at?" She shook her head. "No. Just tired. You have been walking a long time. Longer than I can remember." He brought her a bowl of stew, coaxed her to eat it slowly. She did, with trembling hands and silence, but her eyes flicked to his face more than once, studying him. When she finished, she leaned back against the wall and whispered, "You live here alone?" "I do." "No wife?" "No," he said simply. She nodded, like that meant something to her. Then her eyes began to well, and she pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Franklin stood, giving her space, but not stepping away fully. "You do not need to say anything you are not ready to. Just rest." Bethany looked at him, tears falling now, quiet, steady. "I have not felt safe in a long time. You are now," he said, voice low. "You have my word." She slept through the next day and into the evening. Franklin tended the woodpile, checked the traps, and kept the cabin warm. He did not ask more questions. When she woke again, she watched him from the corner of her eye as he poured her tea. "You do not ask much," she said. "I figure you will tell me what you want to when you want to." She stared into the cup. "That is rare." He gave a small shrug and sat across from her. "So is finding someone half dead on your doorstep." That made her smile faintly, and it was the first thing that lit her face. "I suppose you are right." As the days passed, she grew stronger. She helped wash dishes, folded the extra quilts, and watched the fire in long silences. Franklin learned she liked the smell of coffee even if she did not drink it, and that when she had nightmares, which came often in those first weeks, she would walk outside and sit on the porch until her breathing calmed. One night, early snowfall dusted the ground. Franklin found her sitting out there wrapped in the quilt he had given her, shivering but awake. He stepped outside and offered her another blanket. "You will freeze." "I used to sit like this with my son," she said, eyes on the trees. "We would watch the stars come out." Franklin's breath caught. "I had 2 children," she said softly. "Owen and Olive. They are gone. Taken." He sat down beside her, heart heavy. "Taken how?" Her voice cracked. "Raiders. Men. They came through our settlement near KC. Burned homes, killed anyone who fought. I ran with the children. We hid in the hills. But they found us the second night." I was knocked out. When I woke, they were gone." She buried her face in her hands. Franklin reached out, slowly, and rested a hand on her back. "I am so sorry. I searched for them for weeks," she said. "I followed tracks, asked at every town. Nothing. No names, no faces. I do not even know if they are alive." He did not say hollow words. He just sat with her, hands steady on her back, while snow fell soft around them. From then on, she stayed close to the cabin. She helped with the garden despite the cold, and when Franklin worked the fence line, she walked beside him with a basket for kindling. They spoke more, laughed sometimes. She told him about Owen's love of birds, about Olive's gap-toothed grin. He told her about the creek where trout ran thick in the summer, about how he came west after the war and never found a reason to leave. "You have been alone a long time," she said one evening, as they peeled potatoes by lantern light. "I have," he said. Bethany looked at him, quiet for a second. "Do you ever wish you had someone?" He looked at her then, really looked. "I do now." Her cheeks turned pink, and she looked down, smiling softly. That night, she touched his arm as they stood by the fire. Just a brush of fingers, but it lingered. He turned toward her, slow and sure, and she did not pull away. Her eyes met his, and for the first time since she arrived, they held no fear. "Franklin," she whispered. He dipped his head slightly, giving her time to stop him. She did not. Their lips met warm, sure, and full of all the quiet trust they had built. Her hand settled on his chest, and his arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. When they parted, she did not step away. "I do not know what happens next," she murmured. "We figure it out together," he said. "If you want that." "I do," she said, voice trembling. "I really do." He held her tighter. "Then that is what we will do." The morning sun had not yet cleared the ridge when Franklin opened the barn door and let the horses out to graze. The frost held to the grass and fence rails in thin silver sheets. Bethany stood just beyond the porch, shawl drawn tight, watching the breath of the animals plume in the cold air. "You always up this early?" she asked. "Comes with the life," he said, adjusting the saddle on the roan gelding. "There's a rhythm to it. You miss a beat, you fall behind." Bethany stepped down the 2 wood steps, boots crunching on the stiff ground. "I'd like to learn that rhythm. The kind that keeps a place going." Franklin studied her face, the steadiness in it. "You thinking you might stay on?" "I think I might," she said. "If that's all right." He gave a single nod and passed her the lead rope. "Then you'd best start with feeding. Grain's kept in the bin by the stall." She took it without hesitation and walked into the barn, already moving like she belonged. They didn't speak much that morning. They didn't need to. By midday, she'd managed the feed, swept the floor, and helped Franklin move the last of the cured hides into the cellar. She was quiet in her work, but not withdrawn. There was purpose in her step, and when she met his eyes across the yard, her gaze held more weight than it had before. Inside, Franklin poured 2 cups of hot water steeped with dried mint leaves. Bethany leaned against the table, hands red from the cold. "You ever trapped before?" he asked, handing her a cup. "No," she said. "But I've cleaned rabbits. My father taught me before he passed." Franklin pulled out the map he kept folded in the drawer by the stove. The parchment was browned at the edges, the ink faded. He pointed to a narrow creek bend just north of the cabin. "Mink and beaver move heavy through here," he said. "If the snow stays light, we can check it on foot." "Tomorrow?" she asked. "If you're up for it." "I am," she said, and sipped her tea. That night, after the dishes were dried and the fire banked low, Bethany lingered by the window. Franklin was mending a leather strap beside the hearth. "I never asked what brought you west," she said. Franklin didn't look up from his stitching. "Wasn't anything noble. War ended, and the cities felt too loud. I came out looking for quiet. Found it." Bethany stepped away from the window. And it's enough? Just the quiet? He glanced at her then. Was, for a long while. She nodded but didn't press. Instead, she crossed to the shelf where a carved wooden horse stood beside a tin box. She picked up the horse, running her thumb along the smooth grain. Yours? She asked. My brother carved it. Gave it to me before I left Missouri. You close? Used to be, he said. He stayed back east. Married a girl from St. Louis. I haven't seen him in over 7 years. She returned the carving to its place, careful not to shift the dust. I used to think I'd never leave Kansas, she said quietly. But nothing holds when you're running. Franklin set down the strap. You're not running now. She looked over, hair falling loose from its braid. No. I suppose I'm not. The next morning, they walked the ridge trail together. Snow had melted off the south-facing slopes, leaving the ground damp and spongy. Bethany carried the traps in a burlap sack slung over her back. Franklin pointed out tracks: fox, elk, something heavier, and she listened closely, asking questions that showed she was learning more than just the names. At the creek, Franklin crouched beside the bank and anchored the first trap near a narrow run of water. You've got a steady hand, he said, passing her the second. Bethany knelt beside him and set the wires as he'd shown her. It helps to have something useful to do. They fell into rhythm again, setting traps, marking trees with bits of cloth, checking for signs of movement. When they finished, they sat beneath a fir tree and shared the bread and dried apples she'd packed. I've never met a man who didn't talk just to fill silence, she said after a while. I've never seen silence as empty, he replied. Some things settle better when you don't stir them. She turned toward him. I spent so long trying to stay alive, I forgot what stillness felt like. Franklin reached for her hand, rough against his palm. It's all right to let it settle now. She didn't pull away. You make it feel possible. The wind moved through the trees above them, and a hawk cut across the pale sky. Neither of them said anything else. By the time they returned to the cabin, the air had turned sharper. Bethany hung her coat by the door and lit the lantern while Franklin stoked the fire. She moved easily now, not like a guest, but like someone who belonged in the space. After supper, Franklin unrolled a sheet of oilcloth and laid out the tools for sharpening. Bethany sat across from him, threading a needle through a patch of linen. I want to build something here, she said, softly but certain. Not just stay. He looked up. What kind of something? A life, she said. With you, if you'll have me. His hand stilled on the whetstone. I know I carry a past that's not easy, she said. But I'm not lost anymore. Not like I was. Franklin set the blade aside and stood. He crossed the space between them and knelt beside her, resting his hands on hers. I don't want quiet for quiet's sake anymore, he said. I want it with you in it. Bethany leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. Her breath was warm, her voice a whisper. Then we begin. And they did. By late November, the river had begun to crust with ice at the edges, and the wind carried a bite that crept through cracks in the walls no matter how well the fire held. Franklin patched the north window with oilcloth while Bethany stitched a lining into a pair of wool mittens she'd cut from an old coat. Their movements were quiet, hands busy in shared purpose, each attuned to the rhythm of winter's approach. After the midday meal, Bethany opened the chest beneath the window and pulled out a folded canvas satchel. She ran her fingers along the seams, then glanced over at Franklin. This yours? He paused with his hammer mid-air. It was my father's. Held seed and ledger paper back when he ran the farm. Why? I want to go into town, she said. I'll need something to carry supplies. Franklin set the hammer down slowly. You sure you're ready for that? I've been thinking on it. I can't stay tucked away forever. If I'm to build a life here, I need to face the land as it stands. That includes the town. He studied her a long moment. I'll go with you. She met his gaze. I thought you might say that. They left the next morning, bundled in layers, the wagon creaking beneath them as the wheels rolled over frozen ruts. Franklin drove with a steady grip, eyes scanning the tree line more by habit than concern. Bethany sat beside him, her hands wrapped in the mittens she'd finished the night before, the canvas satchel resting at her feet. Buffalo came into view just after midday, the buildings low-slung and plain, their roofs gathering snow in idle patches. Smoke drifted from chimneys. A dog barked somewhere near the livery. As they passed the first storefront, Bethany's fingers tightened around the edge of the seat. "You all right?" Franklin asked. "I will be," she said. Her eyes didn't leave the street. They tied off the horse outside the general store. Franklin stayed near, letting her lead. Inside, the warmth was heavy with the scent of kerosene and dried apples. Shelves held everything from salt pork to buttons. A man behind the counter glanced up and nodded. "Morning, Ames." Franklin returned the nod. "Need flour, lamp oil, and sewing thread." Bethany moved toward the bolts of cloth near the back, fingers brushing over the textures. She chose a length of blue calico and 2 spools of dark thread. When she returned to the counter, the man looked at her with the kind of glance that lingered too long. "You new around here?" he asked. "I am," she said. Franklin stepped closer, his presence quiet but firm. "She's with me." The man raised his hands in mock surrender. "Didn't mean anything by it." Bethany didn't speak again until they were back outside. She adjusted her shawl and kept her eyes down until they reached the wagon. "I don't like being looked at like that," she said once they were moving again. "You won't be alone in it," Franklin said. They stopped at the blacksmith's for nails, then at the feed store. Bethany held her head higher by then, her voice steady as she asked about salt and vinegar for pickling. No one else questioned her. By the time they turned back toward the cabin, the sun had dipped below the hills. On the road home, Franklin glanced at her, the light catching the curve of her cheek. "You handled yourself well. I didn't fall apart, if that's what you mean." He smiled faintly. "I meant what I said. You won't face it alone." Bethany turned toward him, the wind pulling strands of hair loose from her scarf. "There's something I need to tell you." Franklin didn't speak, just waited. "One of the men who took my children. I knew him." His hands tightened on the reins. "He was a settler. Lived near us for years. Went by the name Morin. He used to trade with my husband before Caleb died. When everything happened, he was the one who struck me." Franklin's jaw set hard. "You're sure?" "I couldn't forget his voice if I tried." "You think he's still out there?" She nodded. "I don't expect to find him. But if I do, I need to be ready." Franklin kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Then we'll be ready." The cabin welcomed them back with the hush of falling snow and the creak of settling logs. Inside, Bethany unpacked the supplies while Franklin fed the fire. They worked without speaking until the warmth returned. Later, as they sat by the hearth, she pulled a folded scrap of paper from her satchel and handed it to him. "What's this?" "A list of names. Men who passed through KC in the weeks before the raid. Ones who bought supplies or asked too many questions. Morin was with them." He read it in silence, then folded it carefully and placed it inside the ledger by the mantel. "You kept this all this time?" he asked. "I wrote it down the day I could hold a pencil again." Franklin looked at her. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're fighting." "I think I always was," she said. "I just didn't have anyone to fight beside me." He reached across the space and took her hand, fingers warm against hers. "You do now." She didn't look away. "I know." Outside, snow drifted against the windows, soft and steady. Inside, their hands stayed joined, the silence between them no longer heavy with absence, but full with promise. The first wolf tracks appeared 3 mornings after their trip into town. Franklin spotted them near the chicken coop, long and deliberate in the fresh snow, circling twice before veering off toward the timberline. He stood over them with narrowed eyes, quiet, then stepped back and brushed snow over the prints. When he came inside, Bethany had already laid the table with a pan of cornbread and a bowl of boiled hominy. She looked up from slicing a wedge of lard for the pan. "Something wrong? Wolves came close in the night," he said. "Too close." She set the knife down. "They bolt this early in winter?" "Only when they're hungry." Bethany chewed her lip, then moved to the fire. "I'll stay near the cabin today." Franklin nodded once, then picked up the rifle from its place near the door. "I'll check the traps before noon. Should be back before sun's low." Bethany didn't answer right away. She looked at the rifle, then at him. "You sure you won't need another pair of eyes?" He studied her a moment. "You up for it?" She pulled on her coat and wrapped a scarf tight around her neck. "I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't." The woods were still under a gauze of frost, branches heavy with clinging snow. They moved with care, Franklin leading, Bethany a few steps behind with a short-barreled shotgun slung over her shoulder. It had belonged to her husband, but she'd cleaned and oiled it herself just last week. At the third trap line, they found a rabbit, frozen stiff but untouched. Franklin reset the trigger while Bethany scanned the trees. "How long did you stay in KC after your children were taken?" he asked without looking up. 3 days, she said. "Long enough to bury what remained." He didn't press. The silence stretched between them, not empty, just full of things either needed to explain. Farther along the snow grew deeper, the drifts swallowing the lower brush. Bethany paused near a pine with a broken lower limb. "Franklin." He stepped to her side. She pointed toward a low path in the snow. "That's not elk." He crouched, fingers brushing the shallow edge of a track. "Men. 2 of them. Boots, not moccasins." Bethany's brow furrowed. "Hunting? Could be. Or passing through." But they came close to the trap line. She looked in the direction the prints ran. "You think they saw the cabin?" "Hard to say. But I'll check the ridge tomorrow." They turned back, Bethany keeping her hand on the shotgun. Neither of them spoke again until the cabin was in sight, smoke curling steady from the chimney. That night, while Franklin sharpened the skinning knife, Bethany pulled a folded square of calico from her apron pocket. "I'm making something," she said quietly. He looked up. "What kind of something?" She opened it to show a half-sewn patch of fabric embroidered with small birds in flight. Owen loved red-winged blackbirds. Used to say they looked like fire against the sky. Franklin set the knife aside. "You're stitching him into the quilt?" She nodded. "And Olive too. I'll find a way to sew her in once I know how." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You want to build a memory, not just carry one." "I need to," she said. "So I don't forget where they were real." Franklin held her gaze. "They were. And they mattered. Still do." Bethany folded the patch again and tucked it inside her sewing tin. Later, as they washed the dishes, she glanced at him. "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" "I did once," he said. "Before you." She dried the last plate and set it on the shelf. "Then I'm glad I found your doorstep." He turned slowly toward her. "I've never been glad for hardship. Not mine. But I'd live through each day of it again if it brought you here." Bethany stepped closer and placed her hand against his chest, just beneath the collar of his shirt. "I never expected anything like this again. Not safety. Not warmth. And certainly not love." His hand came up to cradle the back of her neck, thumb grazing the edge of her hairline. "But here it is." She nodded, eyes full. He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't ask for anything but pledged everything just the same. When it broke, she didn't move away. Her forehead rested against his, breath soft between them. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not because I'm afraid to leave. But because this is the first place that feels like home." "You are home," he said. "Wherever you are, that's where I'll be." Snow fell through the night, muffling the world in quiet. Inside, the fire burned low, and 2 hearts, long made weary by sorrow, beat steady in the hush of something wholly new. Wind pushed low against the eaves and rattled the shutters gently, but inside, the cabin held a quiet steadiness. Franklin sat on the floor by the hearth, working a length of rawhide into a halter for the young mare he was breaking. Bethany knelt beside him, reading from a dog-eared tract on herbal tinctures, her thumb holding the page where it listed preparations for lung ailments. "I didn't know mullein could be steeped in goat's milk," she said, glancing over the rim of the page. "It'll settle a cough faster than whiskey," Franklin replied. "My mother swore by it. She never let us near a doctor." Bethany leaned closer, her voice low. "What was she like?" "Stubborn. Small hands, but she could lift a sack of grain like it weighed nothing. She made her own brine for pickling and never once wrote anything down." He paused, twisting the leather taut. "She died before the war." Bethany touched his knee, just a brief press before she folded the book closed. "You don't speak of her much. She was the last one to call me by my full name without bitterness." She smiled softly. "Franklin? It suits you." He looked at her, expression gentled. "I like how you say it." She stood and reached for her cloak. "I want to check the shed before dark. If I'm going to start a root cellar come spring, I need to know what kind of slope we're working with." He rose too, brushing his hands on his trousers. "I'll come." But she shook her head. "Let me go alone this time. I need to see it with my own eyes, not yours." He hesitated, then gave a quiet nod. She left with her boots crunching across the snow-packed yard, and Franklin watched her go, the shape of her against the paling sky something that settled deep in his chest. She returned a half-hour later with a scrap of paper and dirt under her nails. "There's clay beneath the frost. Not deep. If we dig down, we'll need to shore the walls." He took the paper from her and studied the rough sketch she'd made. "You think like someone who plans to be here a long time." "I do," she said simply. That night she laid her head on his shoulder and whispered, "I want to put down something permanent. Not just memories." "You already have," he said. "No. I mean more." She tilted her face toward his. "I want to marry you." Franklin didn't answer right away. He turned to face her fully, eyes searching hers. "You certain?" "I've had enough of running from what I want," she said. "I want this. I want you." His breath shook a little as he reached for her hand. "Then come spring, we'll stand in the grass behind the cabin, and I'll say the words right." She leaned into him, her voice nearly a whisper. "We don't have to wait." He gathered her close, his voice rough with feeling. "I don't want a preacher or papers to make it true. I want the days, the work, the quiet nights beside you. That's the truth I'll live by." She closed her eyes and pressed her palm to his chest. "Then we're already wed, aren't we?" They spent the next weeks preparing the land. Bethany marked off where she wanted the garden rows, and Franklin hauled stone from the creek bed to line the path she'd planned from the porch to the shed. She found a length of muslin in the bottom of the chest and repurposed it into curtains for the single window above their bed. He carved a peg rail for her herbs and hung it beside the stove. One morning in late December, Franklin rode down into Buffalo alone. He returned after dusk with a small parcel wrapped in cloth and tied with string. Bethany waited until he'd hung his coat before asking, "What's that?" He placed it carefully in her hands. "For you." She untied it slowly, revealing a silver ring nestled in a square of flannel. It was plain, its surface worn, but when she looked up, his eyes were steady. "My mother's," he said. "I kept it all these years. I want you to have it." She slipped it on, and it fit as though it had been waiting for her all along. The next morning, they walked to the back of the property where the snow lay untouched. Franklin took her hand, and in the hush of the frozen wood, they spoke simple vows, his voice low and sure, hers clear and full of quiet joy. No one witnessed it but the pines and the pale winter sun, and it was enough. That night, they sat beside the fire, her head resting against his shoulder, the ring catching the light with every flicker of flame. "I feel them sometimes," she said. My children! Like they're watching. They'd be proud of you, he said. Bethany nodded. I think they'd like you. I'd have liked them too. She turned her face up to his. You'll build a life with me. Even with all I carry? I already am, he said. And I'll carry it with you. They kissed then, nothing hesitant in it. Just a long, deep knowing that what they had was not fragile anymore. It was rooted. It would endure. The winter passed with storms and thaw, with laughter at the table and quiet mornings where the only sound was the stirring of oats, or the creak of settling beams. Bethany planted seeds in hand-turned soil, and Franklin built her a bench beneath the aspen tree behind the shed. They lived as though they'd always been meant to find each other. In the early days of May, Bethany stood in the doorway with her hand resting low on her belly, the breeze playing at the edge of her apron. Franklin came up behind her, arms circling her waist. You all right? He asked, voice low. She turned and touched his cheek. I feel full, she said. Not with fear. Just with life. He kissed her temple. We'll make room for all of it. They did. And in the years that followed, the cabin grew by 2 rooms and 1 child born on a Sunday morning when the light came through the window just right and Bethany's hands clutched his with a fierceness that broke him open and remade him all at once. They named her Olive. The land held them, season after season. The scars they bore never vanished, but they softened, made way for joy, for laughter, for the gentle rhythm of days shared in truth and trust. And when the wind came down off the mountains in the quiet dark, it no longer sounded like mourning. It sounded like home.